The existence of scarcity has been one of the underpinning assumptions in economics, and in life. For all of history, it could quite possibly be argued that scarcity is the source of all conflict, suffering, difficulty, generally all suboptimal existence by every species in every moment ever to have existed. It could also be argued that this is not the case. Regardless of your ontological convictions, whether you're an evolutionist, a creationist, materialist, naturalist, whatever, there's an argument to be made that even without scarcity, conflict could have arisen. As Dostoevsky asked, what is to be done with the millions of facts testifying to how people knowingly, that is, fully understanding their real profit, would put it in second place and throw themselves onto another path, a risk, a perchance, not compelled by anyone or anything, but precisely as if they simply did not want the designated path, and stubbornly, willfully pushed off onto another one, difficult, absurd, searching for it all but in the dark. Evolution, though not random, has seemed to result in certain sentient species preying upon others simply for sport or in spite of abundant energy elsewhere. But would this have happened if there had never been scarcity in the first place? What would a reality like this even look like? Scarcity has been a defining reality in not only human history, but the history of every species. It causes starvation, pestilence, war. In seeking to overcome it, we form philosophies, economic and political systems, and religions. It's either a direct cause or central theme in, arguably, every custom ever developed by the diverse societies across the globe. Arguably, it's given rise to who we are. What would happen, then, if scarcity were to end? What would happen if our technology and understanding became so advanced and our generation and distribution of resources so efficient that there was an abundance of the general goods and services necessary for not only the survival of all humanity, but the pursuit and realization of personal fulfillment of the basic desires of most every individual? This theoretical occurrence is called post-scarcity, and it's a concept that has fascinated and sometimes frightened leading human thinkers for decades. Now granted, decades isn't a particularly long time to have been thinking about something as a race, but the recency of this theory in and of itself is reflective of one of its most striking features. Technology is advancing so rapidly and in such a relatively unforeseeable manner that the world is changing at an unprecedented exponential rate. Optimists such as myself would say things are improving more than we have ever seen before. If you doubt this or want to learn more about it, check out my upcoming video, Is the World Getting Better or Worse? We don't know where things will go, of course. There are many dilemmas brought on with every new advancement. Potential race-ending catastrophes that seem ever more possible as the scale of our destructive power increases along with all the rest. There are also theories that the rate of exponential advancement we are currently experiencing may slow or even tableau at some point, but to me that doesn't seem terribly likely. We can only imagine a future based on what we know, and we have always tended to fall short in the past. For more on this and on the tangible objectivity of progress in general, check out the advancement timeline I've linked below. It studies human development through history and kicks off a playlist in which I plan to demonstrate that the world is objectively better today than it has ever been. I also plan to acknowledge some of the admittedly daunting challenges we face, the potential challenges we anticipate, and how these might be dealt with. Anyway, back to post-scarcity. There are several ways of expressing or defining what post-scarcity would look like, but generally it is said to be a civilization in which most goods can be produced with great abundance with minimal human labor so that they become available to all very cheaply or even freely. Basically, the idea is that through further mechanization and further understanding of science, the systems by which we produce and distribute goods and services will become so efficient and automated that humans will not need to work. And this means that not only will there be no need to work, but there will be no practical need to compete. Now, practical need is a key distinction, and one we'll get into later because I do actually think competition will always continue to exist. I think humanity will always distribute itself across a hierarchy of some sort, regardless of how each specific age or era might vary with regards to the relative prosperity, power, authority, abundance, freedom, and so on, generally enjoyed by the entire populace. I believe there will always be a hierarchy. By Bronze Age standards, we all live like emperors, better in many respects, but because of the general advancement of humankind, we aren't all emperors in the current social hierarchy. Current-day emperors, and their more democratic counterparts, live even better, like perhaps a god would have been envisioned to live in ancient times. Anyway, the point is that I believe hierarchy will always exist, and indeed that competition and hierarchy are necessary components of the human definition. Essentially, hierarchy just boils down to the valuing of certain things differently, and the pursuit of certain goals above others. As we'll discuss later, I believe this is a fundamental element of existence. Meaningful existence, certainly. But the lack of practical, material need in a post-scarcity society means that, generally speaking, no individual skill is functionally more valuable than any other, and there's no longer an incentive to selectively pursue any particular skills or knowledge bases. People would be free to learn about and occupy their time with whatever they desired, uninhibited, all the time. For now, however hazily we might be able to envision our future, it's obvious that even this most humble of post-scarcity societies would change humanity in ways which are largely, or even perhaps entirely, unimaginable. It confronts us with questions as to how we relate to our fellow humans, how we shape society and culture at large, where our ideas of morality or law come from, how we place ourselves in the universe, and the things with which we occupy ourselves. It poses fascinating questions, equal parts terrifying and exciting, regarding our psychology, our philosophies, whatever sense of purpose or meaning we derive from our existence. In order to give an overview of this topic, and the possibilities and questions it gives rise to, we will divide the remainder of this already long video into two sections. First, what is post-scarcity? It's obviously somewhat ambiguously defined, so we'll look at what the various conceptions of it are, and which, if any, seem possible or likely to happen. We'll probably explore the deeper ramifications of each version, as I see them at least, in a future series of videos, but for now we'll give a brief overview of what seem to be the most likely scenarios. As a side note, I may reference Maslow's pyramid of hierarchical needs. Even though this is a very complex concept that can be misunderstood or perhaps misapplied, I do find it quite useful. Most of us are familiar with it in its simplified form, and that's all I really need for today's discussion. So what is post-scarcity? First, the automated production and distribution of most basic goods and services is universal. This means foodstuffs, energy, entertainment, water, air, space. Because of advancements in robotics, 3D printing, AI, nanotech, genetic engineering, and so on, these things are available in such abundance that they can be readily had at zero or inconsequential cost to every individual. There would be a revolution in ultra-efficient, completely automated farming, as well as the transportation required to distribute foodstuffs and other resources to humanity entire. 3D printing in the home could also save many of us from the need to rely on any external source at all for the production of whatever we need. There's an explosion of individual autonomy, in which we are all linked by a vast network of resource distribution, but in which we can probably be as completely self-sufficient as we wish, at no significant drain of energy, time, or resources. This means there's no need to work in the traditional sense, if at all. If all needs for general life and pleasure are met, the only need to work comes from what we choose to work on. We're already beginning to see this today, with many people turning to studies in history, ancient traditions, taking up again old arts like blacksmithing, horsemanship, swordsmanship, martial arts, subsistence farming, permaculture, asceticism, and on and on and on. While there are numerous reasons people pursue these things, almost all of them have to do with the recognition that today there's abundant superficial provision elsewhere. Generally, once a society's individuals are able to take care of things like feeding themselves and their children, avoiding predators and death by exposure, and so on, they begin to think in the slightly longer term. Each individual first begins to think about their own future and that of the people immediately surrounding them, but as abundance increases, they discover more energy and desire to broaden their circle of influence to an ever greater community of people. For centuries now, millennia in some places, we've had historians and linguists and poets and philosophers, storytellers, musicians, and thought leaders. Nowadays, as availability of goods and services increase, more and more people are able to, and do, pursue activities along these lines. Activities that don't advance the survival in an immediate sense, but that do so through much longer, more abstract, extremely powerful methods. These are the advancements that seek to understand and transform humanity, our relationships, and the reality in which we find ourselves. With regards to things like historical reenactments, craftsmanship, or permaculture, some choose these lifestyles to escape the chaos or stress or rush of today's interconnected world, in pursuit of peace, of connection with nature or with ancestors, of health, greater or deeper self-knowledge or metaphysical understanding. This would be a psychological, spiritual, or other such abstract need, and falls on a higher tier of Maslow's pyramid. If forced to live in the interconnected world and embrace all its technological stress and rush, it's arguable that they would likely survive. But the point is that they have the choice, due to the vast abundance of resources, not to. On the other hand, you have the people who embrace the other extreme end of the unnecessary, the wingsuit jumpers, astronauts, and so forth. While many of these, astronauts, deep-sea diving, and so on, are pursuits geared towards greater human advancement, they're not necessary for human survival. So obviously, as resources and abundance increase, we are moving in a post-scarcity direction. Already what we recognize as the basic goods and services of everyday life stretch far beyond the purely vital. If this phenomenon grows until the basics include not only everything needed for survival, but everything that most people want at most times, it might be said that we will have reached post-scarcity. The degree to which non-vital activities need to be universally accessible in order for society to be considered post-scarcity is endlessly debatable. Interstellar exploration or wingsuit jumping, for example. I believe that activities like these, that by nature stretch the limits of what we can do, are always going to remain competitive. Say we take interstellar exploration to its extreme. I would say that even if we master faster than light travel, and every single person has access to their own starfleet and their own personal wormhole, there will still be a limit to humanity in terms of what we have explored, the resources we have to do so, and the number of stars we can possibly settle. As our intergalactic reach abilities increase, we will always encounter new barriers of some sort or another. If you want to consider possibilities like this in greater detail, check out my thought experiment video on limits of post-scarcity, Wagyu beef, Dyson spheres, and money. So, a basic version of post-scarcity might have limitless food delivered and custom-cooked by machines at any hour of the day. It might have endless streaming services, chat rooms, VR games, or entire simulated realities in which you could live or entertain yourself as you saw fit. It might have robust communities built around every single hobby imaginable, from subsistence farming to basket weaving to music composition to zero-gravity hand-to-hand combat. For reasons I'll get into later, I don't actually think we would experience this as post-scarcity on a psychological, emotional, or spiritual level, and indeed I don't think we could or would want to. But with this, the most basic form of post-scarcity, the point is that if you want to, you have the time and resources to pursue whatever thing you like, even if you happen to be horrible at it. A more extreme version of post-scarcity suggests that if such technological advancement is achieved, it will mean not only the end of physical, material scarcity, but the end of any concept of scarcity at all. Proponents think that with the absence of insufficiency, there will exist none of the suffering produced by our constant desire for more, our constant reaching, our constant awareness of our own limitations. In this version, medicine, psychology, neurology, genetics, and other health-related fields will have become so advanced that biological defects will be a non-factor. Any biological challenges facing us today will be non-factors. If not able to genetically engineer ourselves completely from scratch, we will at least be able to repair any errors in DNA before a human ever attains consciousness. We will have monitors so finely tuned to every aspect of our biology that any chemical imbalances, any neural decay, any problem whatsoever can be detected and repaired before it ever impacts our lives. Or more likely, the fine-tuned upkeep of our bodies will be so constant that there will never be any problems to speak of. There will be muscles constantly building, no need to work out, no need to eat healthy, no need to limit what you eat at all. You will be able to eat as much as you want in any flavor, any texture, any time. Indeed, there will be no need to eat at all unless you want to, in which case you could literally spend your entire life trying every possible permutation of flavor and never gaining or losing a pound. Many predict that the generation of adults today will be able to enjoy prolonged life, genetically engineered designer babies, a diet of cheap, healthy, and fully lab-grown meat, and many other changes. One of the largest is the idea of a BCI, or a brain-to-computer interface, also in a video upcoming, which would essentially integrate full digital capabilities directly into our brains, obviously changing things. There's not only an end of medicine and surgery, but an end to psychosis, psychology. The psychological dangers of constant eating, for example, or constant pleasure of any sort, would be eliminated by the same biological technologies just mentioned. We would be able to scientifically determine the maximally healthy lifestyle for every individual, and provide the biochemicals needed to not only motivate each individual to perform these activities, but to make it pleasurable, avoiding negative psychological effects such as addiction, and yet maintaining whatever degree of pleasure we discover is optimal for healthy motivation, overall joy, and so on. And this is just one example. Supposedly, every single field of human necessity would be similarly impacted until there was nothing at all we need to do, no danger that the state of things might change. There would be no more mental illness, no ailments, no risk of grave disfigurement or injury maybe, because we could simply print body parts that integrate perfectly into your body's system, because they're patterned after your body down to the molecular level. We may not even need to fear accidents causing immediate death, if we can back up our consciousness on digital hard drives and re-download it without any painful memories, without any sensation whatsoever that any sort of death had ever occurred. The most ambitious of these versions of post-scarcity speak of a world without pride, greed, hate, lust, violence. It's a world without all such conflicts that supposedly arise from lack, from want, from the imbalance between people's desires and what they can achieve. All such conflicts are gone. It is a truly want-free society. This is, of course, mind-boggling. It seems to run counter to our deepest motivations, our deepest fears, the very underpinnings of our being. To imagine this world is to imagine a world in which many of the deepest questions humanity has always grappled with are simply gone, non-factors. I personally doubt this is possible, and certainly doubt it's desirable. It's interesting to note that the problems would not be solved, they would only have disappeared. If we simply take away all possible source of conflict, all mental capacity for anger and so on, are we really better? And yet, if we're concretely living, thinking, existing in the best way possible, how can we say we're not better? This gets pretty metaphysical, of course. It starts to prompt questions as to the nature of human psyche, whether we have some supernatural and immaterial quality such as a soul or spirit, whether we are conscious agents facing a spectrum of moral possibility, and so on. Those are topics for other videos, but for now, what would a world like this do to us, in which we have truly perfect control over not only a vast abundance of external resources, but every detail of our biology? Would we go mad from boredom? Likely not. Assuming we have the chemical and biological advancement to monitor and control such things. Would we then be living in a state of unending chemical adjustment, a sort of eternal high with no need to ever sober up, no danger of overdosing, no limit to the variety of experience? Would we have purpose, or does purpose imply imperfection, a suboptimal reality, a challenge? Is a challenge necessarily an imperfection or a scarcity? Would we have simply ceased to need purpose because our survival is guaranteed, but retained it because that's who we are? As all the great thinkers have always said, it seems that scarcity, struggle, conflict, pain, these things are a fundamental part of us. They're inextricable, the anvil upon which we are forged, the fire in which we are tempered, the grindstone against which we are sharpened to our purpose. A world without these things can be terrifying to consider, and hardly seems post-desire or post-conflict at all. It can seem like a futuristic nightmare, an infinite, vacuous hell in which our greatest enemy is not AI, not human violence, not climate catastrophe, no threat to our actual physical well-being. This threat is one which seems at once infinitely more sinister and infinitely more unavoidable, because it comes from within us, from perfection itself, from the very mastery over the things that have so long threatened our survival. But can perfection be said to be an enemy? I don't know. I find it more an interesting thought exercise or philosophical challenge than the real sort of theoretical future for humanity I'm interested in considering. If we do reach some sort of crazy reality like this, we'll doubtless first pass through many other stages or versions of post-scarcity, and it's these which interest me in a more direct sense from a scientific, futuristic, technological perspective. To hear more of my thoughts on these less ambitious versions of post-scarcity, subscribe and you'll be notified as this series advances. We'll be discussing such things as post-scarcity economics, post-scarcity government, post-scarcity crime, post-scarcity purpose, already glossed over in this video. More specifics dealing with post-scarcity technologies, simulations, augmented reality, gene hacking, bioengineering, and more. For now though, please consider subscribing if you enjoy content like this. There's lots more upcoming. I'm discussing storytelling, philosophy, technology, futurism, sci-fi, all the interesting things. Thank you so much. Until next time.